Today's daf is daf Yud Aleph, and we begin with Tanur Rabbanon, and that's about 6 lines down from the top, 7 lines down from the top. Now, today's sugya is exclusively from beginning to end about the mitzvah of mezuzah, when it applies, when it doesn't apply. That's the subject of this daf, and the background to this discussion was Shar Nikanor, which is a shar that leads into the Azora and requires a mezuzah. Bisharecha, the Torah says that it's your gates. And it's a general statement that seems to include many categories of gates. And therefore, Echad Shari Batim, so we have a gate that leads into a house, Echad Shari Chatzeros. So from the entranceway, you lead to a courtyard, and from the courtyard into a house. Echad Shari Medinos, because again, the gateways of countries, of provinces, also lead into houses, into homes. And even though these are not owned privately, because we're talking about Shari Medinos that are owned by the government, by the entire Medina, but nevertheless, since they open up into private homes, therefore it's considered bisharecha. And here there's a discussion in the Achronim about a certain Rashi. Rashi seems to indicate that when you have provinces that are surrounded on all sides, then there's a shar that leads into that province, and there's no other way of getting access into the province. Other cities are open cities. They're not walled, they're not surrounded by mountains, and therefore there are many different ways you can get into the city. There's no specific shar, and therefore there's no requirement of mezuzah. But here we're talking about specifically, as Rashi seems to indicate, a case of a city that's surrounded on all sides by mountains, and you have to enter into the main shar, the main gate, in order to get access to the city. Echad Shari Ayoros. And once again, not the whole Medina is surrounded by mountains, but a particular city is surrounded by mountains, and there's one shar that leads into the city through the mountains. In all these cases, you're chayav in mezuzah. Yesh ben chovas mitzvah la makom. Makom meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then mishum shenemer uksavtem al mezuzot beisecha uvisharecha. And we're saying that the word bisharecha is coming to include all these cases of gates. And where's the bias element here? Bias meaning a place where people live. The answer is that since these areas through the gates will lead into houses, that makes them bisharecha, and they're included in the chiyuv mezuzah. Amalei abayler of Safra. Hani abuli de mechoza. What about the gates? The word gates in Aramaic is abuli, in plural. And Mechoza is a major city, and the rabbi of that city was Rava. And Abai was asking Rav Safra, by time below, Avdul Rabbana Mezuzah. In terms of the gate into the town of Mechuza, assuming the Goyim would not object, why not just simply put up a mezuzah like the gates of all the cities and all the countries, like we learned before in the Brisa, derived from Bisharecha? Amalei, Rav Safra responded, Hanu chizuk li akra de kuvihu de avide. The purpose of these gates was not entranceway into the city. And in all likelihood, there were many ways of entering into Mechoza. This particular gateway, which was the main gateway, was a support for something called a kubi. Kubi is a tower. And very often a city in its entranceway had a tower, not for religious purposes, but for security purposes. And they would put a shomer up on this tower, and he would be in charge of looking around to make sure that nothing suspicious is going on. And all this is for protection purposes. And right now, at this point in the sugya, we understand Rav Safra to mean that it was the shar that supported this tower. its purpose for which it was built was not designated as entranceway into Mechoza, but rather as a structure upon which the tower stood. So they would actually construct a tower on top of a gateway, and the gateway was very solid, very thick, and it supported the tower, and no one lived in the tower. Amalei, so Abai responds, what do you mean? No one lives in the tower. The akra de kuvi gufa tiboy mezuzah da ispei dira l'shomer beis hasurim. Inside this structure, they had a prison, and the warden of the prison, who's called a shomer beis hasurim, actually lived in that structure. So forget about the fact that this is not an entranceway into the city. The kubi itself should require a mezuzah because there's someone sleeping and living in the kubi. And since this gateway gives you access to the kubi, to this tower, and there is a shomer beis hasurim living in that tower, therefore the shar of mechuzah should require a mezuzah. Dasani, we learned in the Brisa, beis knesses, which in and of itself, according to this shita, would not require a mezuzah, but if it's got a beis yeshbo beis dira lechazan knesses, the sexton or the shamish, or what we call the chazan of the Knesset, used to take up residence in the Beis HaKnesset. I remember in my youth, in my father's shul in Flatbush in Brooklyn, there were quarters for Jimmy. You know, he was the overall caretaker of the Beis Knesset. Is chayeves b'mezuzah. Once you take this Beis Knesset and you designate it as a Beis Dira, somewhere in the structure of the synagogue, there is a residence, then the synagogue is chayev in mezuzah. Therefore, if the shomer beis hasurim takes up residence in this structure, which is called the tower of kubi, then the shar leading into that kubi and the kubi itself both should require mezuzah. Elamar Abaye comes up with his own original answer as to why they didn't have a mezuzah at the gateway into Mechoza. And the reason is because the Goyim didn't allow it. They treated, or at least they accused the Jews of doing some sort of witchcraft with this mezuzah. And therefore, we cannot expose ourselves to danger to these Goyim and their kings and their officers who look for every opportunity in the world to accuse the Jews of wrongdoing. And the Sanya, the Brisa, tells the following story, that mezuzas yochid nivdekes pamayim b'shavua, every 7 years we're required to check the mezuzah that's owned by an individual. Shel rabim, if it's owned by the masses, then pamayim b'yovel, only twice in 50 years do we have to check the mezuzah. The mezuzah has a chazaka that it's kosher, but and of course, you know, you're talking about a community of many, many people. No one's going to want to check the mezuzah. It's not my responsibility. I live here, but I'm not going to take it upon myself. So the Chachamim, when they enacted a chiyuv b'dikas mezuzah, and they said, don't rely on chazaka, check your mezuzahs, sounds like Chabad. And they did so in a case of a community on a low ebb level. They were very lenient, and they only required checking the mezuzah twice in a jubilee in 50 years. And now we get to the story. The Omar Rabbi Yehuda Maisa Artevin Echad. I'm not sure exactly what Artevin means. He came from that country, or maybe Artevin is an Aramaic word for a certain kind of artisan, a certain professional. Anyway, he was appointed in that particular location to check the mezuzah. And you get the impression that this took place in the city of Mechoza. In Tzipori. And what happened was, the man was checking the mezuzahs, umatzo kazdar echad, and someone who worked for the king in the king's palace and was designated like a meter maid, to give out fines, finds him this artavon checking the mezuzahs. And natal mimenu elef zuz, he imposed upon him a penalty of 1,000 zuz. I mean, you see that the goyim were opposed to this mezuzah business, and they were imposing fines. It could lead to danger. In this particular case, all right, he probably spent his life, paying 1,000 zuz as a fine, as a penalty, but it could possibly be dangerous. And in the case of Mechoza, the rabbis decided that putting up a mezuzah at the gateway of Mechoza is too dangerous of an operation. Now, normally we have a principle that shluchei mitzvah einam nizakin. If you're doing a mitzvah like checking a mezuzah or putting up a mezuzah, you would not suffer any damage, any harm from it. V'amar Rabbi Elazar shluchei mitzvah einam nizakin. The Gemara answers heicha dekvia as zeka shchicha. As shiny. Usually, Gemara uses the term heicha dekshchicha as zeka shiny. Here, the Gemara used the term heicha dekvia as zeka shiny. Kvia means that there was an enactment, in this case, a governmental edict that generated a situation of danger with regard to putting up a mezuzah. Now the Gemara wants to prove that this principle of Rabbi Elazar, that shluchei mitzvah nizakim, is not an absolute principle. That the Torah recognizes that under certain situations called kvia hezeka, we are not guaranteed protection, and we have to take our own protection. Dichsiv, and here we're going to learn about an episode that took place in recorded in Shmuel Aleph, with regard to the Navi who anointed David HaMelech as king to replace Shaul HaMelech. Vayomer Shmuel ech elech v'shamash Shaul varaguni. Shmuel the Navi, who is now sent by the Ribono Shel Olam to anoint David HaMelech as a replacement of Shaul, when Shaul would find out about it, said Shmuel to the Ribono Shel Olam, he'll have my head. Vayomer Hashem, and Hashem responded, you're right. This is a very dangerous situation. I want to give you the following recommendation to fake out Shmuel. To fake out Shaul. Eglas bakar tikach biyodcha, take with you a young calf, and v'amarta, when he comes and asks you where you're going, don't tell him that you're on the way to anoint a king to replace him, but rather lizbach Hashem basi, I came to bring this as a zevach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself was worried, as Shmuel was, about the danger that he would have exposed to if Shaul HaMelech would get wind of the fact that he was going to anoint the replacement. And now we begin the main sugya for today's daf. And this sugya is the sugya of otros. Otros means that my residence is not because I sleep in this location, in this house, or I eat in the house. I don't do any sleeping or eating there. It's purely for storage purposes. And what's the status of an otzar? Is that called a base dira? What constitutes dira? And again, many dimensions of this question have their mirror image in Masechet Eruvin. And we're going to have here a machlokes between Rav Kahana and Rabbi Yehuda. If I had a whiteboard, I would outline an overview of this machlokes, because this is the main sugya for today. And we're going to see that Rav Kahana insists that an otzar, under normal circumstances, is chayav in mezuzah. But you have to remember the names here. That's Rav Kahana. According to Rav Kahana, there was never a question in anyone's mind that all the otzos that we have many different types of storehouses. We keep grains and food and animals, and we store all sorts of different things. They're all chayav in mezuzah. Stam. Stam means unless they did something in the use of that otzar, of that storehouse, that was inappropriate for a mezuzah. Because sometimes they had in the back of the otzar, they had a bath, and for privacy purposes, the members of the household that owned that storehouse would go into the back where they had that bath, and that's where they would bathe. And bathing, of course, when a person is undressed, that's not appropriate for Kavod Hashem, for the glory of Hashem, of putting up a mezuzah. So that's a specific type of an otzar, which, according to Rav Kahana, is potter mezuzah. But a stam otzar, if it wasn't used as a bathhouse, according to Rav Kahana, everybody agrees, and we'll see two brises about that, but both brises agree, would be chayev in mezuzah. So, okay. I wrote myself a little bit of a summary here, and again, that's the opinion of Rav Kahana. Now, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is a little bit more complicated. I suggest that we go through the sugya inside until we come up with an overview of Shitas Rabbi Yehuda against Rav Kahana. But Rav Kahana is very clear in that an otzar in general is chayiv v'mezuzah. Tani Rav Kahana kamed Rav Yehuda. Rav Kahana brought this brisa to the attention of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rav Kahana interpreted this brisa. Rabbi Yehuda is going to have a different take on the brisa. Beis HaTeven. So now we're talking about a storehouse, an otar that was designated for straw. Beis HaBakar for animals. Beis HaEitzim for wood, for logs. Beis HaOtzaros. These were kind of general storehouses that were used for grains and so forth and so on. All the above are pturim in a mezuzah. But why? Mipnei shanoshim neosos bahen umay neosos, says Rav Kahana, rochatzos. Because the women find in the back of these otzaros a bath, and that's where they went for privacy purposes to bathe. So the storehouse now takes on the status of a Beis HaMerchotz, and a Beis HaMerchotz is antithetical to a mezuzah. So the implication here of Rav Kahana, and this is going to be Rav Kahana's shita from beginning to end, from A to Z, is that a storehouse, stam, is chayiv v'mezuzah, unless it becomes converted and designated as a makom rechitza, as a Beis HaMerchotz. Amalei Rav Yehuda. So Rav Yehuda now basically fears ice. In other words, he derives the conclusion that is almost explicit in Rav Kahana's interpretation of this brisa. Time of the rochatzos. The only reason why the otzer is pot is chayev. I'm sorry. The only reason the otzer is potter from mezuzah is because the women bathe there. Hastama stam otzer chayavim. And this is something that's going to be contested by Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is not going to accept the principle that stam otzer is chayiv v'mezuzah. Again, Rav Kahana says it's almost explicit in the brisa. It says in the brisa that the reason why it's potter mezuzah is only because noshim neosos bahem. So Rabbi Yehuda is going to have to reinterpret that phrase mipnei shanoshim neosos bahem. Vasanya, says Rabbi Yehuda, I have a brisa that would support my position that stam otzar is not chayev in mezuzah. Refes bakar, which is a storehouse for animals, ptura mina mezuzah. And there's no qualification here because nashim neosos bahem. So don't tell me, Rav Kahana, a whole story that because the women are bathing there, that's why it's potter mezuzah. It's potter mezuzah, says Rabbi Yehuda, because it's not a base dira. You don't eat there, you don't drink there, you don't sleep there. All you do is store, in this case, animals there. It's a stable for animals. That's not chayav mezuzah. So why does the first brisa tell me that the reason why you're potter from mezuzah, in the case of all those kinds of of storehouses, whether it's a storehouse for straw, for wood, for a barn, or for grains. Why is it because Noshim Neosos Behem? What do you mean Noshim Neosos? They dropped the ball on Noshim Neosos Behem. A base Hamercha, a base Otzar is not a Makom Dira. It's not Chayev in Mezuzah, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Why did the Bryce have to qualify by adding Kolabos and Gorea and it's part of Mezuzah because Noshim Neosos Behem? Ella says Rabbi Yehuda, my Neosos, miskashtos. The Brisa wants to tell you that there is a residential use of this otzar, of all those otzars that we mentioned, and yet it's still part of a mezuzah. And miskashtos means that they set up a little parlor of a cosmetic center. They set up in these otzros. Again, there wasn't any room in their house, so they went out to the storage house and they set up a mirror and perfume and rouge and all the rest. The Hachiktani, and what does the Brisa want to tell you? Even though now the women are getting certain use and benefit, which is typical of a residence of a bias from the base otzar, nevertheless, it's part of mezuzah. Afal pi shanoshim is kashtos ben pturin, because the main function is an otzar. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, an otzar is not considered a base dira and it's part of a mezuzah. Amalei Rav Kahana. V'shanoshim miskashtos bahen pturos. Is that really true? We said that neosas behen, and they use it for bathing, then it's part of a mezuzah. A stam storage house is chayav in mezuzah. And now to boot, you're telling me that they use it for putting themselves, to beautify themselves, and they're part of a mezuzah? For Asanya, I'll show you a brisa. Refes bakar p'tuvin a mezuzah. And why is that? Because apparently Rav Kahana finds one brisa that holds that an otzar is part of a mezuzah. So again, it's an interesting thing. In the first brisa, Rav Kahana said that an otzar is chayiv mezuzah. The only exception is when you convert it into a bathhouse. Now he's saying that stam, an otzar, according to the second brisa, is part of mezuzah. Is part of mezuzah. And even if I hold that a stam storehouse is part of mezuzah, however, b'shanoshim is kashus ba chayeves b'mezuzah. But if the women use and designate this storehouse, which is a barn, and they do their cosmetic preparations there, that's called dira, and that even if I hold stam otzar's potter, that upgrades an otzar, a storehouse, into a base dira. And therefore, what I'm going to conclude is that miskashtos tanoihi lidi dina mistoma tanoihi. I'm going to tell you that, according to my understanding, a stam otzar is a machlokus between these two brisos. And then, according to that mandiomar, that a stam otzar is patur, now we're going to have another machlokus, whether miskashtos in a stam otzar, according to the mandiomar who says stam otzar, the second briso, that stam otzar is patur b'mezuzah, is it now chayav b'mezuzah because noshim miskashtos? So let's just summarize now the two approaches to these brisos, that of Rav Kahana and that of Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rav Kahana, the first brisa holds that stam otzar is chayav in mezuzah. The only exception is when you convert it into a beis hamerchos. The second brisa holds that stam otzar is part of mezuzah, and now we have an issue. What happens in a stam otzar, which is Noshim miskashtos behen. Would the second brisa agree? Then in that case, the otzar is chayiv b'mezuzah. That's Rav Kahana. Rabbi Yehuda holds that according to the first brisa, an otzar is potter b'mezuzah even when it is designated for kishut. And the second brisa holds that if you designate it for kishut and the women adorn themselves, beautify themselves with cosmetics in the otzar, then it's chayiv b'mezuzah. But everybody agrees, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that stam otzar is potter b'mezuzah. And now the Gemara quotes another brisa, as if we haven't had enough brises today. And the Gemara is going to quote a brisa and then try to interpret this brisa according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rav Kahana, respectively. The Sanya Beisecha, the Torah says, Uksavtem al mezuz Beisecha, Beischa miyuchad lecha. Miyuchad lecha means it's designated for residence. Prat, to the exclusion of Beis HaTeven, Beis HaBokar, Beis HaEitzim, Beis HaOtzos, Shepturim min HaMezuz, V'yesh Mechayv. So we have here machlokes about all types of storehouses, where the chayev in mezuzah or potter mezuzah. The brisa continues, b'emes amru. Now, I don't know exactly why the brisa has to say b'emes amru. Maybe it means that kuliyamalo pligi. I don't know. That beis hakitze, beis habursaki, beis hamerchatz, beis hatfila, v'sha'anoshim ne'otzos bahen, p'turim min mezuzah. Any place that's designated for something that is not appropriate for mezuzah, it is used for washing the body or for tanning hides. It's used as a beis hakise, beis hamerchatz, beis hatfila, a place where you go naked in order to immerse yourself in the water. In all these cases, it is not appropriate for a mezuzah. Okay. Now, we have a statement here in the brisa that the Reisha that is machlokes with regard to storehouses. Rav Kahana mitaritz l'taime, Rav Yehuda mitaritz l'taime. Each one will interpret this brisa in the light of his shita. Rav Kahana mitaritz l'taime, and that is that beisecha, beischa miyuchad lecha prat lebeis hatem, beis habaku, beis ha'itz, and beis ha'otzros shepturim min mezuzah b'stam. And in other words, this brisa is recording a machlokas about a stam otzar, which we saw already in Rav Kahana before, above, when we talked about the two brisos. The first brisa says that a stam otzar was chayv mezuzah, the second potter mezuzah, and here we see both opinions codified in this brisa. And then, Bemis Amru, we have this list of places that are inappropriate for mezuzah: Beis Hakise, Beis Habursaki, Beis Hamerchatz, and Beis Hatfil. Shnoshim is nosos. Meine osos rochtzos. P'tur min mezuzah. Back to Gemara. Before we get to Rabbi Yehuda, just Rav Kahana, Ihachi Hainu Merchatz. Why does the brisa have to list in the enumeration of those areas that are part from mezuzah, both Beis HaMerchatz and Noshim Nosos Bahem? You just told me, Rav Kahana, that Noshim Nosos Bahem is Merchatz. So why the repetition? So the Gemara says that Rav Kahana understands that there are two categories of a Beis HaMerchatz. Ashmina Merchatz the Rab, Ashmina Merchatz the Yochid. You can have your own private bathhouse, and there's a public bathhouse. Salka Taitach, I mean, I would have thought Merchatz the Rabbin. Did Nofish Zuamei. There's so much sweat and foul odor coming from human bodies in a public bathhouse that it's parted from mezuzah. But avol merchatz the yachid, it's, the air is pretty clear. Once in a while you go in there to wash. Lo nafish zuame, emo l'chayv mezuzah kamashmal, and that's why the Bryce has to add the case of noshim neosos bahem to tell you that even in a private bathhouse, which is not a bathhouse, a Beis HaMerchatz is public. Now we get to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda v'taris l'taimei hochi koma. Beisecha, beischa miyuchad lecha. Prat, lebeis hateven, beis habakar, beis ha'etzim, beis ha'otzos, all the storehouses, shebtu mezuzah. Afilu miskashtos. V'yesh mechayvim b'miskashtos. Avol stam divrei hakol poter. So Rabbi Yehuda is going to say that the machlokas that's recorded in this brisa about the chiv mezuzah is a case of an otza that was also designated for women to faputz themselves, which is a kind of dira, a kind of residence. But a regular classic otzar is certainly, according to everyone, poter mezuzah, and then bemis amru, beis hakisei, beis haburtzike, beis hamerchatz, beis hatfilah, afal picha noshim miskashos, so now we have at the end of the brisa a list of all the cases of zuama, which is a foul odor, and therefore the potter from mezuzah. But wait a second, it says afal pisha noshim miskashos, and we just finished saying that according to the yesh machayvim in the reish of the brisa, miskashtos is enough to generate a chiyuv mezuzah. Will Rabbi Yehuda stama divrei hakol potur? Are you telling me that so just 1 second. So now we have to say the following: that if it's a base oter and masham miskashtos, man, we have the yesh machayvim. If it's a base ha merchatz or a base hatvila, etc., where there's a foul odor there, then even though the women go in there privately to beautify and adorn themselves, it's still potter from mezuzah. Will Rabbi Yehuda stama divrei hakol poter? Can we defend the position of Rabbi Yehuda that everybody agrees that a storehouse is potter unless it was designated for kishut? For Asanya, we have a brisa that says bisharecha. There's a general, all-inclusive word, a phrase that's being used here to include all batim. Echad shari batim, echad shari chatzeros, echad shari medinos, echad shari yoros. V'refes v'lulin u'matbein v'otzos yain v'otzos shemen chayov v'mezuzah. We have on this list not only the gates of the cities and the states and the courtyards, but we also have stables and lulim, or chicken coops. We have sheds and storehouses for wine and for oil. Yachal, the brisa continues, Shani Marbe Af Beis Shar